I used to have a happy, normal childhood. At least, that's how I remember it. My parents were loving, my siblings were kind, and our home always felt warm. But when I turned 10, the nightmares started. At first, they were simple. Dark corridors, shadowy figures, the usual childhood fears. But they quickly became more vivid, more personal, as if someone was inside my head pulling strings. The dreams always started the same way. I'd be in my house, but something felt off. It was always too quiet. I'd call out for my family, but no one would respond. Wandering through the halls, I'd eventually find myself in front of a mirror, but my reflection wouldn't move. Instead, it would smile, a horrible, unnatural grin. Then I'd wake up gasping for air, my heart pounding like I'd just run a marathon. After a week of this, I stopped telling my parents. I didn't want to seem like a baby. But the nightmares kept coming. Sometimes they were worse. I'd find my family standing in the kitchen, their backs to me. I'd call their names, but when they turned around, their faces were blank. Other nights, I'd find myself locked in a dark room, screaming as invisible hands clawed at my skin. Finally, after what felt like a month of torment, I confided in my Uncle Joseph. He wasn't like the rest of the family. He was quieter, more serious. A therapist, he always had a notebook in his hand and a look of deep thought on his face. I figured if anyone could help me, it would be him. When I told him about the nightmares, he listened intently, scribbling notes as I spoke. His expression was unreadable, somewhere between concern and fascination. When I was finished, he leaned forward and said, "Dreams can reveal what your mind is trying to hide. Sometimes they're a doorway to emotions you're too afraid to face. Tell me, have you been feeling any resentment toward your parents?" The question caught me off guard. Resentment? Toward my parents? I shook my head immediately. No, I love my parents. They're amazing. I'd never feel that way about them. Uncle Joseph smiled faintly, but there was something strange about it. Something cold. Sometimes we don't know what's lurking in our subconscious, he said. Dreams have a way of uncovering the truth, even if it scares us. Let's do a little experiment. For the next few days, I want you to try something. If your parents tell you to do something, say no. Push back a little. It'll help you release whatever frustration you're holding on to. I didn't like the idea, but I trusted him. He was the expert, after all. So the next day, I started saying no. When my mom asked me to clean my room, I refused. When my dad asked me to set the table, I rolled my eyes and ignored him. It felt so unnatural, so wrong. I hated seeing the hurt on their faces. By the third day, my parents sat me down. They asked me what was going on, why I was acting so differently. I didn't know what to tell them, so I lied. I said I was stressed about school. It was the only excuse I could think of. But the nightmares didn't stop. They got worse, much worse. In one dream, I was lying in bed, unable to move. My door creaked open, and a shadowy figure stepped inside. It leaned over me, its breath hot and rancid on my face. When it whispered my name, I realized it wasn't a shadow at all. It was me. Terrified, I ran back to Uncle Joseph. I begged him to help me, to make the nightmare stop. He listened patiently, then said, "There's one more thing we can try, but it's unconventional." "What is it?" I asked. He hesitated, tapping his pen against his notebook. "Your mind is too mature for your body," he said finally. "That's the problem. Your subconscious is trying to escape the limitations of your physical self. To truly free yourself, you need to set your body free." I stared at him, confused. "What does that mean?" He smiled again, that same cold smile. "If you have one more nightmare, I'll explain everything." That night, I lay in bed, too afraid to sleep. I kept the light on, my blankets pulled up to my chin. Hours passed, and nothing happened. No nightmares, no shadowy figures. I started to relax, thinking maybe it was over. Then I heard it. A whisper. It was soft at first, barely audible, but it was right next to my ear. My heart stopped. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. Set it free. I recognized the voice immediately. It was Uncle Joseph. I bolted upright and screamed. Standing by my bed, half hidden in the shadows, was him. His face was pale, his eyes wide and unblinking. He didn't move. "Uncle Joseph," I whispered, my voice trembling. He smiled. "Shh," I screamed again, louder this time, and he stepped back, disappearing into the hallway. I ran to my parents' room, tears streaming down my face, and told them everything. My dad didn't hesitate. He stormed into the guest room where Uncle Joseph was staying and dragged him out of bed. A shouting match erupted, my dad demanding answers while Uncle Joseph denied everything. Then my dad grabbed Uncle Joseph's satchel, the one he always carried everywhere, and dumped it on the floor. What spilled out made my stomach turn. There were notes, pages and pages of handwritten entries, diagrams and articles about inducing nightmares. There were descriptions of experiments he'd done, methods for making dreams more vivid and terrifying. But the worst part was the photos, images of children, all with hollow eyes and blank expressions. Uncle Joseph tried to grab the papers, but my dad shoved him against the wall. "Get out," he growled, "before I call the police." Uncle Joseph fled that night, leaving everything behind. The police were called, of course, and what they found on his computer was even worse than what was in the satchel. I won't go into detail, but let's just say it confirmed my worst fears. Uncle Joseph wasn't trying to help me. He was using me, manipulating me for some sick, twisted experiment. I never saw him again. My parents refused to talk about him after that night, but sometimes I still dream about him. I'll wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I can hear his voice, whispering from the shadows. "Set it free.